What's up, everybody? It's your favorite machine doer's favorite nerd, and today we are looking at the NECA 1/4 scale Donatello that just recently was released. I have mixed feelings about this guy. There's a lot of good stuff about him. There's some great stuff about him, and then there's some stuff that we do need to be aware of and discuss a taste. But first impressions were definitely fairly impressive. It wasn't until I really started messing with him that I started noticing a few issues. So we're going to get into that, but first, per usual, we're going to take a look at some accessories. Okay, so we got a few hands. We're going to talk about them, and then we'll stop at the last one and really go through it because the detailings are pretty much the same throughout. So we got a left and right thumbs up hand. That's fine. You can see the way it plugs in, little notched peg. We got a left and right relaxed hand, and then we got one flat hand. The flat hand is to hold the pizza. I'll show that in a second. But before I do, let's talk about it. So all the detailings are pretty much the same, not only on this, but on the figure as well. All of these scales are all textured. There is wash, like in the creases and stuff there to give some depth. There's wash around the nail bed. The nail bed is painted and sculpted. And then there's wash applied to certain areas, and then the veins are all sculpted and stuff like that. And then there's some variation in the green. Like the flat green is, I'm trying to give you the best because it's shaded all over, which is great, but like probably right there, that little pocket. But then we have some olive green there. We have some darker green over here, and then there's some brighter green right there. So there's three shades of green. There is some paint. It's like a green, that olive green. There are some paint mishaps. Just like blotches rather. There's one here, and there are a few throughout that we will talk about. Let's see if we can't, like right there's some white. Like, I don't know if that's paint or some sort of other substance, but we will check that out. So then he also comes with a slice of pizza. We go to Pizza for a piece of pizza, and we have red sauce painted on. We have the cheese all sculpted. We got sausage with green peppers, probably some onions on there somewhere, I would imagine. Some olives. All the sauce is painted like that's. I'm guessing it had to be like just done specifically because it wouldn't have picked up in a wash. But like in the crust, there's like little sauce recesses. It's really well done. The back is all dry brushed with a lighter shade of brown, so there's even love there. And then you would have it in this hand, and you would have him hold it, and that's how it's not like held with tension or anything. It's just sort of balanced. But the platform to balance it is wide enough where it doesn't pose really an issue. And then he has the canister of mutagen. It does have the crack in it, and then it has the yellow and black caution tampoed on there, the radioactive symbol tampoed on there, the radioactive material tampoed on there, and then all this sort of stuff on the back, TCRI. Hazardous materials, all that stuff. So tons of tampo paint on this, and a nice silver metallic finish, and then the yellow and black paint. It's really cool. It's a well done accessory. There are some issues with him holding it. You just kind of gotta squeeze it into one of the relaxed hands, and he will hold it with tension just fine. And then lastly, he does have his bow staff. It's about a foot long, I would imagine, and it does have this. The wrap is all painted. It's all sculpted as well. The paint is done relatively sloppy. It probably would have been better to have just made a separate piece that you glued on or actually wrapped on because there's just like between the brown and the cling, it is a bit sloppy. The actual grain of the wood is all sculpted and it's washed, so all the wash sits in the recesses fairly well, so that looks good. It's a little inconsistent, but it's okay. He lives in the sewer, you know what I mean? And then there's no wash on the ends. There's a little bit on this one, not on this one. And yeah, so it's pretty well done. As you saw, he holds it in either one of his holding hands or both holding hands that we saw him with in the beginning of the video, and then he can also store it. And he stores it on the back of his shell here on these straps. They are a soft goods material, and it is like I do know a few knots. I'm not familiar exactly with this style knot, but what's nice about it is you can tighten it up and keep it there with tension. Because of the type of soft good that they used here, like it's not like rope or anything. It's just like this this fabric almost. It does get loose, but that allows you to take it out easier. So you know it has its advantage. Its advantages as well. Forgive my speaking. Fourth review of the day, which brings us to this guy finally, and we're going to go bit by bit. If you watch my channel fairly often, we're going to treat it kind of like we treat combiners. So the head is on a ball joint, and it feels like it's a double ball joint from the head into the neck. The neck is a connected piece to the torso, so it's not like this piece is covering it. It's not like the neck gets you any articulation. All the articulation is from the bottom of the jaw and the top of the neck. But it is fairly decent once you get it warmed up. And we're going to talk about the warming up process as we go through this because there is a lot to it, but fairly decent. You also get the swivel, not as far, but you do get it. The headband is on a swivel, so you can have it out to the side, and then these are a soft good here in the back, which does work. It's like an accent. It's kind of like how Star Wars Black Series utilizes their soft goods. And the face sculpt is so good. The purple mask here is all sculpted, and then it's washed with a darker purple. All the scales, once again, are sculpted, the mouth lines, of course, and then it's all painted with those various shades of green that we've already discussed. The eyes are painted white, and then the brown and black are also painted. No reflections painted on there, but it is a glossy finish, so it does pick up some natural reflections. It does have like the turtle spots that the movie kind of became notoriously known for, painted throughout, this really dark green patches, and on the top of his head there are some as well as eyebrow sculpts. So this is really, I mean, for me, this head sculpt is what sells it. It does a tremendous, tremendous job. We start to have some troubles in this area. So one thing that you may or may not notice is that this shoulder here is a little bit more slouched down than this shoulder. And I'm not sure if they did that for this strap or if they were trying to give him like a little bit of an attitude. But as a result, it never really looks natural. It can look natural as long as you put it in a pose that matches this, but it's also it's fairly limiting as well. There's also this brown spot here. I'll see if I can't zoom in on that. What I imagine that is one of these brown spots over here where there should have been a black spot in the center to make another spot on just the collarbone area there, but they didn't add the black spot, so as a result, it just sort of ends up looking like a mistake. Now, the same thing happened right there. So it's just something to take into consideration in regards to this. It's not perfect, you know. This strap here that goes across the torso is a floating piece. It feels like a softer plastic, and it does have some dry brushing on it, some heavier places than other, but it does give a very worn, dirty, used look throughout, and then all the stitching here is all sculpted and done well. We can talk about the shell since we're here. It's beautiful. The shell itself is not washed, it's dry brushed. It's this darker brown, and then it's dry brushed with this lighter shade of brown throughout, and it is beautiful. Beautiful, 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 beautifully done. And then we have the kind of the undershell here. It's a darker green, and this is washed with a darker shade of green. It looks like possibly with a black, it's hard to tell, but at least somewhere in the ballpark. Some of the green does spill over paint-wise from the skin onto the inner shell, but that's not really a big deal. You don't really notice it. It does, so this even, all right, we'll just talk about that. So there is articulation. It seems like it's a ball joint from the torso into the pelvis. Well, I guess from the chest into the abdomen area. There is no real abdomen area. It's just a skeleton. And then this piece here is a softer plastic on the front and then a harder shell that sits over top to kind of hide it all, which is clever enough and smart enough. This softer shell is dry brushed and washed with different shades of this brown, and it looks really good. And then it has this deep wash and all the crevices there, so it really brings out that 3 dimension, which looks good. To continue that sort of tradition, they dry brush this area from this darker brown to this lighter shade, so it looks very gradual. It looks very nice. It's quite well done. Now, one thing I wanted to point out that was a nice touch is because of this ball joint. Let's see if we can't show you better on this side. It does expose more in the back here, but they continued the sculpt underneath the shell, so you never really have any gappage. So that works really well. So a lot of things that work really well. But there is trouble in paradise, and we're getting to it now. So once again, we've talked about the skin texturing, the scales, and all this stuff. It's beautiful. All the spots, the turtle spots, they look great. No problems there. It all works really well. The shoulders, however, do not. They are on disc hinges, like a Marvel Legend. It's basically the disc sits underneath the bicep. I mean the what is this? Delts, right? I think so. And it's really tight. Now when I first got mine in the there we go. That's the full range. So it's a little less. Oh, that's too far. It's a little less than 90. It's probably closer to 45. It's not the best. It's not the worst. And the reason why it is this way is so that when you have the arm down, it does have no joint seam up here. That's why it's like that. That's why that decision was made. I'm not sure if I wouldn't have preferred a little bit more. But all in all, it's fine. No bicep swivel. You do get a forearm swivel, basically, right above the elbow. And then this piece is a floating, softer piece, this elbow pad. It is also done beautifully. Has a, looks like a wash to me on it. It's a dark brown with a wash added to all of it to give it a little bit more depth. Now, the elbow, as you can see, is on a hinge. They do cover it with this piece to make it look nice, but articulation is fairly limited, getting you once again less than 90 degrees. The wrist, swivel, and hinge, so that's nice. It's an in and out on both, so no up and down, which does sort of suck. You can get the up and down by rotating the wrist, but it's still the up and down on the top and bottom of the wrist, not on this section and that section. I'm not sure what the best way to say that is. A little silver paint added there where the stitching is also. That's a nice touch. These pieces are also floating pieces, the wrist bandages. When you take the hand off, the wrist bandage will come off with it. So when you put it back on, just be mindful, make sure not to forget it. Makes sense? Let's continue. So the hips, they're actually on ratcheted universal joints, which is nice. So you get out to there, which is pretty much the full Van Damme. Forward you can get just about 90 degrees, backwards pretty much nothing. So that's nice, and they're nice ratchets too. You also get a thigh swivel built into the bottom of them, so that works well as well. For the knee pads, they're done pretty much the same way as the elbow pads, but once again we're limited with articulation, and you pretty much just get to there, which is maybe 20 degrees worth the motion, which is a bummer. Nice thing is, though, they do have this piece underneath there to cover up and cover down for the sculpt, so you never have to worry about that. And lastly, the feet. It's on a, basically, it feels like anyway, it feels like a giant ball peg, but it could, yeah, I think it's a giant ball peg. So you get an ankle tilt up to there, back to there, which is fine, and then you get a rocker to about there, which is okay. Not tremendous, but it'll do. There is a couple other things I want to mention while we're talking about this guy, and as you can see him, he's giving the thumbs up for the slice of pizza, which, you know, I think we all do from time to time. One thing I think that they nailed here, and this isn't final thoughts. The final thoughts are coming. You're going to see how this kind of plays into it in terms of what I think the purpose of this piece is. But what I think this thing nails is, you know, the lightliness, obviously, but also the proportions, like the length of the thighs and little stuff like that. Like those, it reeks of that movie. It really, really does. And it definitely gives you those nostalgic feels. Another thing I want to mention is that, now, we have to keep in mind, I'm in the Maryland area, otherwise known as the Mid-Atlantic, otherwise known as the Middle East to some, otherwise known as crab country, whatever you want to call it. That being said, it's cold. It's December, and it's cold, you know. Temperatures are ranging from 10 degrees to 30 degrees, you know. And when I got this in the mail, it was very cold, and it had a very hard time moving, any piece of it. So I let it sit for a day to warm up a little bit, still pretty cold. Didn't necessarily feel brittle, but it did feel like you could get some serious torque out of some of these longer limbs and have yourself a pretty big issue on your hand. So what I did was I let it sit in a warm temperature controlled climate for a while, and then I took a blow dryer to it and just kind of hit the joints, and now it moves fairly smoothly. And before we move on to final thoughts, it's not really worth showing this guy next to any other figures because I don't have any figures remotely close to this size. So we'll give a measurement. I'll also give centimeters this time because I had my non-American buddies remind me that they don't know what that means. So actually maybe I won't give centimeters because I don't even think this thing measures in centimeters. So it is about 17 inches, just shy of 17 inches to the top of his head. I'll try to put a conversion of those 17 inches to centimeters right there. How do you like that? And then lastly, I will say, one thing I did notice is, starting this collection, I started off with a few third-party Transformers, and then it just sort of grew and grew and grew. And when I got a 1.5-foot statue of a Ninja Turtle in, I did have a bit of a revelation. Okay. I think it's gone too far. Final thoughts wise, you can't really see this the way you see a traditional action figure. It's not really built that way. I don't think it's meant to be that way. What this basically seems to be is an action figure that's big enough, sculpted well enough, and painted well enough to kind of double as a statue. 1/4 scale statues are a very big deal. And I think this is like an attempt to kind of look like it should be. And I'll be honest with you, in a relaxed pose, it could fool a lot of people. It's because the sculpt and paint and all that stuff is so good, but it's not. So what I want from this is a little bit more of that action figure element, and it doesn't have that. This is about as dynamic as I could make a pose, and it still looks fairly unnatural, especially in his right foot. That's not to say it's bad. I actually think it's good, and I'll have him in a relaxed pose, and he will do his job beautifully. That's kind of my end game. I want like a representation of the Turtles from the movie, the game, the comic, and the cartoon, and I'm well on my way. But it's really quite well made. The main problem is the articulation. So what they end up doing is they sacrifice articulation for the sake of sculpt, and that's what makes me think it's trying to kind of pretend it's a statue. They hide as many of the sculpt joints as they can in order to make it look like it's not a toy, but it is a toy. And the moment you pick it up or put your fingers on it, you instantly know because it feels like a toy, but it doesn't perform like a toy. And that's its main issue. So when we talk about the problems with the articulation, we're mainly talking about the elbows and knees. Add that to the ankles and you have yourself a bit of an issue when it comes to getting that action figure feel and look. However, if you want it to stand there and look pretty, it definitely will perform that function. I think they did a great job here because I think their intention was to never make it like a dynamic thing. It's always supposed to be posed simple, standing, relaxed, with attitude and swagger, and it pulls it off beautifully, I must admit. But because it was NECA, I was kind of hoping to get more of an action figure element out of it, and I didn't. But I didn't pay $400 to $600 like you would for a 1/4 scale statue. I paid $100. And I can say on the basis of that, as long as you know what you're getting into here, it's 100% worth it. There is an awful lot of love, care, attention, and effort put into this. It's just not trying to be an action figure. It's trying to be a statue with some options. That's the best way I can describe it. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.